it's already old hat.
IRA did something and legitimately blamed for it. This word was wheeled out during the conflict. There were securocrats in the police and in the British military, but at the time of the peace process, in my experience, there weren't people sitting there and concocting operations, carrying out bank robberies to make life hard for Sinn Féin. Quite the opposite. There were people turning blind eyes in order to continue pulling that movement into the peace process.
The last time the IRA broke its ceasefire, it exploded bombs in London's Docklands and Deansgate in Manchester. Attacks that the IRA refers to as spectaculars. Spectaculars, that is, in which 2 people died. But it's a fine line between wanting to avoid future attacks and ignoring other things that the IRA might be up to.
There is a sinister view that you can continue the development of politics, democratic politics, of a kind on one side and criminality on the other, and that's okay.
The fundamental problems lie within the provisional movement. They have to now address very serious issues about paramilitarism, criminality and decommissioning.
Decommissioning. Nothing says the early 2000s in Northern Ireland like arguments about paramilitary weapons, about how they should be got rid of and when. The issue has caused the first power-sharing government to collapse, and it's bedeviling the formation of a new one between Ian Paisley's DUP and Sinn Féin. To many observers, the delay is deliberate. The stockpile of guns and explosives are the Republican movement's most valuable bargaining chip.
There was no secret deal. Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness didn't have any cards up their sleeves, so the illusion had to be that the IRA is still there and it's still prepared to go back to war.
Oh my God! The second tower has exploded from about...
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President.
The Irish Republican movement has always relied heavily on support from the United States. After 9/11, bombs in city centres, civilian dead and injured, are harder to justify, whatever the circumstances.
To hunt down and to find those folks.
The IRA has had to look again at its modus operandi. Viewed in this light, pulling off the biggest bank robbery in British history might serve a dual purpose. Journalist Chris Moore.
The idea that the IRA would produce this big spectacular where there was no bloodletting, no one died, that would be a sign to their own members, yes, we're still here, we're still capable. And at the same time, it would send a message to the British, yes, we're still here, we're still capable.
If that was the IRA's intention, it's fatally undermined by an event just over a month after the robbery and less than a quarter of a mile from the Northern Bank. Robert McCartney is drinking in McGuinness's bar when a fight breaks out between one of his friends and a member of the Provisional IRA. When Robert and his friends leave, a 9-strong gang follows them out and attacks them with sewer rods and a knife grabbed from behind the bar. The injuries inflicted are appalling. The next morning, Robert McCartney dies.
There was nothing sophisticated about Robert McCartney's murder. It was gruesome. It was something that wasn't pre-planned. It was something that spontaneously happened. But we saw afterwards that there was a forensic clean of the bar.
While this forensic clean-up is going on, the doors of McGuinness's bar have been forcibly shut. The more than 70 people inside are told, this is IRA business. Nobody saw anything.
I mean, their cover-up and their clean-up operation afterwards was meticulous. I mean, we need witnesses. That's what's needed.
Robert McCartney was one of 7 siblings, 5 of them girls, who grew up in the same part of town as his alleged killers. His sister, Catherine, has written that for many outsiders, The IRA was a ruthless guerrilla army shrouded in mystery. The truth, she says, was very different. This was neighbour terrorising neighbour.
It's just getting more evidence and getting more people to come forward and to be brave and just hand these people over. There are no good to neither man nor beast. They're just psychopaths with power.
The 5 McCartney sisters, along with their brother Robert's partner, began a campaign for justice. Given where the family are from, it's much harder for Sinn Féin to of this too as a conspiracy against the Republic, which isn't to say they don't try.
All he can to help them. They have suffered.
The McCartney sisters take their campaign to Dublin.
We wanted to know that we had the support of the Irish government in our quest for justice.
It's not just the Irish government.
I'm looking forward to meeting these very brave souls.
In March, President Bush invites the women to the White House for the annual St. Patrick's Day celebration. For the first time in years, Sinn Féin isn't invited. In other places where the door has traditionally been open, the welcome is now conditional.
It cannot go forward unless there is a complete reckoning with the demands of justice in the murder of Robert McCartney.
This was not a political act. This was a simple, clear murder of a good human being.
At a gala dinner hosted by the American Ireland Fund, the McCartney sisters sit just a few tables away from Gerry Adams and other Sinn Féin members. Along with hundreds of prominent Irish Americans, they watch influential Senator John McCain step up to receive an award. He uses the occasion to pass withering judgment on the IRA and Sinn Féin in the light of recent events.
Historians may look back at this time as a defining moment. The failure of the talks, followed by the bank robbery in Belfast and the IRA murder of Robert McCartney.
One of those present says that Gerry Adams sits stony-faced.
That enough is enough.
At last, the message seems to get through. 3 weeks later, at a Republican rally in West Belfast, Gerry Adams makes a direct address to the IRA.
Can you take courageous initiatives which will achieve your aims by purely political and democratic activity?
The answer to that question comes in July, and in the person of a former IRA prisoner named Shanna Walsh.
The leadership of Owen Ahern has formally ordered an end to the armed campaign. This will take effect from 4 p.m. this afternoon. All IRA units have been ordered to dump arms.
Filmed in front of a tall green hedge and wearing a white short-sleeved shirt, Shanna Walsh delivers a statement that governments and political parties in Northern Ireland have waited years for. A statement many believed they would never hear.
Volunteers must not engage in any other activities whatsoever.
It is almost unnaturally quiet. Now and then, a bird sings. At one point, there is a sound of children playing.
We are conscious that many people suffered in the conflict. There is a compelling imperative on all sides to build a just and lasting peace.
Once again, the hand of history lands.
I welcome the statement of the IRA that ends its campaign. I welcome its clarity. I welcome the recognition that the only route to political change lies in exclusively peaceful and democratic means.
The statement might signal a different future, but there are still matters from the very recent past to resolve. At the start of November, the PSNI arrest 2 men in County Down in connection with the Northern Bank robbery. The DNA of one of the men was on a hat first spotted by Kevin McMullen in the driveway of the bungalow where he and Northern Bank colleague Chris Ward were held the night before the robbery.
I pointed it out to Chris and he made a move towards it. I said, "Leave it, don't touch it."
More arrests follow.
They asked Dominic his name. He said who he was and stood him up and arrested him in connection with the Northern Bank robbery.
They took every single document in the house.
One of those is charged in relation to the purchase of a white van used in the robbery, despite the fact that the van itself has not been seen since the night of the heist. Those charges, like the charges against all the others arrested in those early November swoops, are eventually dropped. The Chief Constable, though, appears unperturbed.
one of the biggest thefts of cash in the history of Northern Ireland, and we're just waiting to see where that inquiry takes us.
Almost from the outset, there have been whispers about one of those caught up in the robbery, Chris Ward. Already in January, he gave an interview to the BBC that he hoped would silence those whispers once and for all.
When you have your family who you love taken, and you have a bank with money, that money means nothing. It means nothing to me. It's my family that I'm worried about.
Far from putting them to bed, the interview seemed to confirm some viewers' suspicions. Confirmed, Chris Ward would say, their prejudices. That because he was a young Catholic man, a Celtic supporter from a strongly nationalist area, he must have been involved.
It's hard enough for us as a family, for me and my family, to try and get over this without people putting out ridiculous stories like that, and it's terrible.
Just 3 weeks short of the first anniversary of the heist, police arrive at the Ward family home in Poleglass and arrest Chris Ward under Section 41 of the Terrorism Act on suspicion of kidnapping and of the robbery of £26.5 million from the Northern Bank. And it's only when his case comes before the courts that people get the full picture of what went on behind closed doors on a night before Christmas 2004.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hi, I'm Glenn Patterson and you're listening to the Northern Bank Job from BBC Radio 4. Episode 9. Testimony. When I turn up at the trial of the only person charged with direct involvement in the raid, I am struck as much by what I don't see as what I do. Struck even more by what I see on my TV when I get home that night.
It's nearly a year since the Northern Bank robbers escaped with more than £26 million from the bank's headquarters in Belfast city centre. During the robbery, the family of a 24-year-old bank official from Poleglass was held hostage. Last Tuesday, that official, Chris Ward, was arrested.
After 12 months of investigations, the Police Service of Northern Ireland appears to have concluded that the biggest bank robbery in British and Irish history was the ultimate inside job. Journalist Chris Moore was finishing a book about the robbery when Northern Bank employee Chris Ward was arrested. The title, Ripe for Picking, might suggest his belief that the Northern Bank's introduction of dual key holders for its vaults was not quite the precaution it had anticipated.
They thought when that was first introduced, that was going to be a big safeguard, that robbers would never have that kind of information. They would never have that access to knowing who, on a particular day, which two people were going to have the keys. That proved to be a flawed logic because, of course, the robbers did know and found out.
Police convinced themselves that it had to be an inside job, and they selected Chris as the inside man.
Niall Murphy happened to be the solicitor on call the night that Chris Ward first got in touch with his firm. He's convinced that Chris's religion, class, where he's from and what sports and teams he follows were being used against him.
It was easy to pick the guy who was involved in his local GA club, who was involved in his local Celtic supporters club, who came from Poleglass, a perceived Republican area. It was clear that this was an attempt to criminalise a community.
On the night before the robbery, Chris Ward had been expected to help out behind the bar of a local sports club.
It's the home of Gaelic games in West Belfast, but today Casement Park was the scene of a police raid in connection with last December's Northern Bank robbery.
The Terrorism Act under which Chris is arrested has recently been amended to extend the time that police can hold the suspect without charge from 7 to 14 days. That extension has never been used until now.
He was the first person in British or Irish legal history to be detained without charge for more than 7 days. So it was an extraordinary, unprecedented police detention.
And that, says Niall Murphy, isn't the only extraordinary aspect of the investigation. Given time off by the Northern Bank to recover from his ordeal, Chris Ward goes for a week's holiday with a friend. They soon discover they aren't alone.
Two young fellas away for a week in the sun in Fuerteventura, and they deployed two undercover police officers from England to Fuerteventura Charlie and Vinny were their code names, and arranged to bump into Chris and his friend over a game of pool at one of the local bars, and said if Chris or his friend had come into any cash recently that they could offer advice on investment.
The case against Chris Ward doesn't come to trial until September 2008. Much has changed in Northern Ireland since the robbery of which he now stands accused. The DUP and Sinn Féin at loggerheads even before the bank was robbed are now in government together. Their nominations as First and Deputy First Minister, Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, not just singing from the same hymn sheet, but laughing at the same joke book.
People that never spoke to one another before now can even chuckle.
This final, quaint, wholly unexpected verb is one that sticks.
We've been described as the Chuckle Brothers by people who thought that would have demeaned us in the beginning. It turned against them in the end, and we're hoping we can chuckle our way through 2008.
It's certainly an improvement on the battle a day that some had initially predicted. Away from the Stormont government, though, some things seem to have become more difficult, not less. Robert McCartney's murder by members of the IRA, weeks after the Northern Bank robbery, has been an even greater catalyst for change than the robbery itself. His 5 sisters, whose campaign has taken them to the White House, are still seeking justice for their brother. In June 2008, they finally have their day in court. The case, though, collapses due to lack of evidence, not least eyewitness evidence. Of the 70 and more people in the bar where the fight broke out that ended with Robert's death, not one person has come forward or been compelled to. 2 months later, the same prosecution barrister is on his feet again in Belfast High Court, outlining the Crown's case against Chris Ward.
He said this included the fact that Chris Ward was in charge of